Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Golf Guru Show. I am your host, Jason Sutton, aka The Guru, where it is my job to dissect, deconstruct, and unpack the habits, life lessons, and tactics of high performers in the teaching business and all other domains in between. On this episode, I talked to my good friend and one of my mentors, Mr. Chuck Evans. Chuck is the Director of Instruction at Emerald Bay Golf Club in Destin, Florida. He is a Golf Magazine Top 100 teacher, author of the book, How to Build Your Golf Swing. He was also the co-creator of the 5 Simple Keys. Chuck is also one of the foremost authorities of the golf machine philosophy based on Homer Kelly's book, and was there almost from the beginning. So this guy knows his stuff, especially when it comes to the golfing machine. So we kind of get into that in our discussion. Chuck has been featured as a presenter at many PGA section seminars and workshops all over the world. There's not much this guy hasn't done in his Hall of Fame teaching career, and I can't tell you how much he's helped me in my career, as I call him one of my mentors and also a very good friend. He's helped me so much throughout the years, and he's my go-to guy for information, that's for sure. In this conversation, we dig into his career, starting with his short stint in the NFL as he was a football player growing up, and how he got into teaching, and also his influences in teaching, which were very substantial early on. We also get into some really great technical discussions on this podcast of how to use pressure plates, some of the things he looks for with his players, teaching average golfers how to acquire educated hands. For those of you that understand what that means in the golfing machine, that's something that I think is very valuable, especially to young coaches out there, and his advice to young coaches on ways to build their skills as a teacher, as a coach. Let's put it this way: when Chuck Evans speaks, you should listen up, and that's because he always brings the truth, and he always brings such great content. So without further delay, let's get to my discussion with my good friend, Chuck Evans.
Okay.
Mr. Chuck Evans, my friend and mentor, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Jason. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. It's been too long. So I'm really excited to kind of get into your career and help some folks out there. And I know you just had a change in locations. You're now back in Destin, Florida, which I guess you were there previously years ago, right?
Right. Yeah, back at Emerald Bay Golf Club in Destin. And I was here for about 8 years ago, to Arizona, because I lived out there for like 28 years. And then I went back there, and I left there to go to Kansas City to open 4 academies, and then had a hip replacement, and it wasn't doing too well. It got cold, and even though we had each facility had indoor bays, it was like trying to put WD-40 on a lug nut. My hip would lock up, so I had to get back to Arizona.
So, take us back to your formative years, like when you were a child and coming up, because I know you were a really good athlete, playing several different sports, and I'd love to kind of get into that a little bit, and then we can go through your career and give the listeners some lineage on how you got to where you are today.
Well, when I was growing up, I played a lot of football and baseball, ran track, 100-yard dash, and kind of that stuff. I mean, I could do a 10-flat 100-yard dash back in the day, which is not very fast now, but it was pretty fast back then.
Yeah, it is fast.
And and we didn't have a high school golf program. I mean, I played golf, but we didn't have a high school program, so golf was kind of way down the line as far as sports for me. And then in the same year, my senior year in high school, we went to the state finals in baseball and football. We lost both games in the state finals because somebody else didn't do their job. And of course, that's a team sport. So
right.
I said no more team sports. So decided to focus on golf, but then got a scholarship offer, several of them, but wound up at Florida State, and was there in spring practice, and I hurt my knee in spring practice, and back in those days, ACL injury was pretty severe. So they took away the scholarship, so I left school, and I went in the military, Army. And then when I came out, my dad was in business, wanted me to join the business, and I said, no, I think I want to play golf. And so I started playing a little bit more and trying to understand what the golf swing was all about. And during that time, as I got back, I still had an urge to play a little football. So I went to a free agent camp for the Washington Redskins and made it through the first cut. George Allen was the head coach then. And that got me as a defensive back. And I was a running back in high school and college.
This was on a bad knee, huh?
I was this is a 6'2", 225-pound running back. So anyway, we're doing a 15-yard back pedal, and I stepped in a hole with the same leg that had surgery and tore.
Oh man!
So that was pretty much the end of my football career.
Right.
So then I was not able to play much golf. So because I was trying to play the minis and a lot of stuff, and when I got hurt that second time, that one took a little over a year to heal. So I just started teaching my friends and people at the club. And then I realized that maybe I shouldn't, maybe playing competitively was not for me. Because back in the day, they only had 60 exempt spots. And every Monday was a qualifier, and I never got into any of those. But they had a mini tour that followed it around. And if you didn't make the field, then you played in this mini tour thing. So I won one event up in Birmingham, Michigan. And then I got hurt again, hurt my hand playing golf, and that was 6 months of healing.
Wow.
So that started my full-time teaching career, which was 1970. So
where were you then? What club was this? Is it Kansas City?
Well, this was Kansas City at an old club out in Kansas City, which is now called the National. Before that, it was called. And it's two courses now. It's Tom Watson designed them both. They're the Deuce and the National. The National is their high-end course, but before that, it was McComas Lake, and then it was McComas Lake, and then it was I can't remember the name now. Harold Shipman was a head pro, and Harold was when I was there, he was 70 years old. Okay. And that was back in the day where you didn't do any business schools. You didn't do anything. You served 5 years under a Class A. You learned how to whip clubs.
So he was your first kind of mentor in the business, would you say?
Yeah. And it was called Winbrook Country Club at the time. And but again, Harold, you mentor for 5 years under a Class A, and you're supposedly a Class A. Well, so anyway, Harold wasn't a Class A, as it turns out.
Oh my! So
I spent a lot of time there, and so I left there, and I just started going to different places. I went to watch all the good teachers I could find. I went to watch Flick. I went to watch Tosky. I went to watch John Jacobs when he would come over here. I just went to everybody that was out there, trying to see what they were doing. Ben Doyle in the golfing machine days, right. Tom Tomasello, so Jimmy Ballard. I went to everybody that was anybody that was anybody. I went and watched, and what I learned was, you learn some things to do, you learn some things not to do, but the biggest thing you learn is how they communicate with students and their players.
Right.
So, if I was going to give advice to young coaches, that's what I do.
Well, that's a great lead in, because that's one of my questions is, and we'll kind of, I want to get back into the golfing machine here in a second. We can go in a lot of different directions, obviously, but what advice would you give to, let's say, a passionate PGM student or a young coach trying to get into the business and try to become better as a teacher or coach?
Well, I've had several PGM students that graduates over the years, and the one thing I would tell them is, you may not realize it, but you don't know everything you think you know when you come to work for somebody else. It's quite the learning experience. I mean, I had one guy come to me and tell me that other than Frederick Truxton, he was the expert on track.
Oh my!
So, and he's just out of PGM. So that's been my experience with him. My experience would be to go to any and every teacher. Doesn't matter if you agree with their philosophy. If they're a successful teacher, go watch and see what they do.
Right.
Learn what they do. Watch what they do. It may be totally against what everybody else says you should be doing, but watch what the student's effect is. Are they hitting the ball effectively? Are they hitting it the way they want? Are they getting better? That's the ultimate judge of a good teacher. And in my opinion, it's not how much you know, it's how much, because knowledge and understanding is two different things. When somebody says, "Oh, I understand," well, you truly don't understand, because if you could do it. That means that you would have the knowledge to do those things. So, go watch old style teachers, go watch new school teachers. Don't get stuck in one particular thing. There's a lot of different camps out there, a lot of different methodologies. They all are back rooted somewhere. Find the back root to it, and whether you believe it, like it, whatever, study any and everything you can. I mean, when I made this move down to Arizona, I sold my entire golf book collection, which was over 300 different books.
Wow.
And I kept the first editions and the autograph copies. I mean, I have Hogan's original 1954 His Secret in Life magazine. It's sealed in cellophane. So
you kept that one, right?
Gets into it. Oh yeah, I kept that one.
Yeah.
I kept all. Yeah, I kept all of the Alex Morrison, Seymour Dunn, those kind of things.
I love those old books.
Oh, and there's things they're talking about. Amazingly enough, they're discovering today. I find that pretty simple to do.
Right.
I was talking with Hall the other day, and I said, "Have you seen anything new?" And talking to Ted Sheftick about it, and Ted says, "I haven't seen anything new in 50 years." I said, "I haven't either. I've seen things that were brought back to the surface,
right, being measured. Yeah,
but I really haven't. Yeah. You can measure now, which you couldn't do 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
But you see them, the way that they're applying the measurements is the same one, basically the same way that good teachers have applied them the whole time anyway. So I do like all the measurement and stuff. I mean, I own all that stuff.
Right.
So I'm a proponent of technology, but I think that you can be a little overwhelmed at times. Player can be overwhelmed at times, but I think the biggest advancement is not really the radar systems, even though I love my flight scope. I mean, I've been with them forever. But I think the biggest thing is more of the force and through the balance mats.
Yes.
How force is being applied, when and where, and what kind of trace they're doing. To me, that's the biggest thing.
So let's talk about that. So what are you using, Body Track or Swing Cat, or which piece are you using? I used to use Body Track. Mm-hmm. That's what I've got.
I still use it occasionally. Yeah. Swing Cat for most of my players. Most of my players are juniors and seniors. I have very, very few millennials. And so I will use a number of things to place different locations in their feet to feel pressure. I mean, a lot of different drills, probably a lot of the same ones that you use and everybody else does because we see them, so we try them, right?
Right.
And if it, and the effectiveness of a drill is not how many times it works. It's does it work for anybody? If it works for one player, then it's effective.
Right.
The drill that works for Mr. and Mrs. Haverkamp might not work for the next pair, or your next student, but it worked for them, so you keep using it.
And that's the genius of the coach, right? Is figuring out which one works for that player.
Right.
So I want to stay on that a little bit too, because I think we don't talk a lot about the technique, but I think this is a good place to go. As you mentioned things that you've found in the pressure, how people are using the ground and ground mechanics. So what are some of your sort of thoughts on that, or some of your go-tos, or what are you looking for in a swing? And I know that it's a pretty broad question, but expand on some of the things that you've learned, I guess, is probably a better way to phrase it, and sort of what you like to see your players doing, whether it's a young junior with some power or just a good player in general.
Well, the pressure the pressure going a little bit to the trail hip, even if they test front hip for the rotational piece, center or rear, no matter where they test, I like to see let's say they test on their lead hip. So if they rotate on their lead hip, I still want to see pressure in the trail leg. Right. And I like the center mass centered, that's or slightly toward target. Okay. I mean, years and years ago, Mike Mateague and Jim McLean did a deal on the pivot. I mean, this is a long time ago, and it was on cover of Golf Digest or Golf Magazine 1. But what they found was at address, a player started with about 5 degrees of tilt with the upper spine away, and as they got to the top, they were 5 degrees toward. Well, that would tell you that the upper thoracic, no matter if you swayed to the right and you had that, that big lean like Billy Andre used to have and Fax used to have, they would lean way right. You can get away with that if you extend the upper spine back the other way. Right. Left tilt and extension of the right side. Yes. Yeah. So you can still do all that and get away with it. And so I like to see the pressure stay in the foot, but the center of mass with an iron, center or slightly forward of center, toward. And as they start down, the center of mass moving more forward and the pressure moving more, depends on the player. It can either be linear or it can be rotational, depending on what kind of shot they're trying to hit or where we're trying to place the club in a path. With a driver, I like to see a little bit of tilt to the right and maintain that. Get a little thoracic bend back toward at the top, and then move your pressure forward. But coming into impact, if I'm trying to get them to hit it longer, I want them to, once they get into their lead side, right about release point, in the last parallel, I want them to feel like they're actually pushing up, but adding pressure to the back foot. Right. To launch the ball high. That braking system, right? Yeah. So what about? Well, I like to see that a lot. Yeah. What about let's go back to the trail foot, because I know I have some preferences there. Do you find that poor players or poor transitions? Do you see more pressure in the toes of the right side as opposed to like the mid foot or a stable right foot or right heel? Well, if they're the typical outside in swinger, there's a lot more pressure toward the toes of the right foot. Right. That's what I'm finding too. Early. Yeah. It didn't get to the heel typically. Right. On the initial part of the backswing, it'll get to the heel. Then as they lift it up and tip over, of course, everything moves forward towards the toe.
Yeah.
But I also think that if you get it too much in the heel, it makes it really hard to push from the heel. It's much easier to push if it's kind of in the ball of the foot.
Right. Yeah, more kind of 50-50 or, yeah, more stable is what I like to see. Yeah, I found that too.
Right. And the one thing you got to watch with any of these systems is if your players are wearing golf shoes that have a much higher heel than the sole, which most shoes do, right?
Yes.
When you get them to stand up, they'll always show more pressure in the heel, and you're trying to get them to go more forward.
Yeah.
I mean, more pressure in the toes because of the slant.
Right.
You're trying to get them to go put more and more 50-50. Well, they wind up feeling like their whole foot's off the ground, but the machines are saying feels too high.
Yeah, exactly. The DNAs are the worst.
Yeah. So I like to see them, when we do pressure stuff, I like to see them do it barefoot, actually.
Yeah, that's really good.
Get a sense then of what 50-50 is.
That's awesome. So you mentioned a centered pivot, and I know that's something that I really enjoy as well in my players, and it kind of takes me back to your involvement with the golfing machine. Tell us a little bit about that story of how you found the golfing machine and how it's influenced your career. I know you were trying to contact Mr. Kelly, and tell us a little bit about that story and how that evolved.
Well, I had been to see all of the big name teachers, not only to learn from them, but paid for lessons with them, and they all tried to have me do something totally different. I mean, it was there was no sense of connectivity between what all these great teachers were teaching. So there has to be a way to catalog or find out this stuff. So, I had watched Bobby Clampett, obviously, and he was a great ball striker. In fact, he just did a podcast about 1982 at the British Open, where he left it in the bunker 3 times and took an 8 on that hole. So, with a 5-shot lead. So, I called up to Seattle. This was in March of '82, and Homer had died in February on Valentine's Day, addressing the Georgia section PGA. Died on stage.
Wow, what a way to die.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Tomasello, Alex Sloan, everybody in that section, Ray Cutshaw, I mean, they were everybody was there. Because this was, Gary Wyron was the director of education then, I think, for the PGA. And they were going to adopt the golfing machine as their teaching standard. But it was a difficult task because of the way the book was written, trying to take that verbiage and put it in a way that the golfers could understand it, much like today. Like I had a doctor the other day. Okay, well, he understood palm reflection, extension, interior and anterior. I mean, he understood all that stuff.
Right.
So I could talk to him in those terms. But other people, you have to talk in the terms they understand. So if the term arching or bowing your lead wrist works, then that's what it is. If I tell them to go into flexion, they have no idea what that is. So you could spend the entire lesson series of, let's say you get five 1-hour lessons. That whole 5-hour series could be just talking about, okay, this is what this is and this is what it means.
Right.
So that's kind of a waste of their money and everybody's time. So if I have somebody that knows what they're doing, another teacher that studied any of the biomechanics of it, then we can talk in those terms. But I primarily don't use those unless I have a player that understands them to some degree. I'll ask them what they understand.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions I was going to ask you, is how you feel about the anatomical correctness of language, and I agree. There is either you've got to explain to them what flexion, extension, radial ulnar means, or obviously you're going to lose that student. But it depends on the player, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, and some of them, again, you can give them basics, talk about flexion, extension, like you said, ulnar and radial. You can basically talk about that, pronation, supination, those little things. But when you're talking about, everybody talks about shoulder turn. Well, the shoulders don't turn. They actually don't turn. It's a scapular retraction.
Right.
Okay. So you have internal and external. So, they say, well, I'm supposed to turn my shoulders. Well, show me what shoulder turn is. They don't turn, dude. Okay. they can internally, externally rotate from that joint. That's what you can do. But they don't turn. So I focus more on, we talk about what the chest is doing. I want to see your chest and rib cage turn. Okay. And then we talk about location of the up at the top and right where the clavicle meets. We start talking about where the sternum is in relation to the ball with an iron versus a wood, depending on the shot you want to hit. So, it's a lot of it is just, and I've always said, people's golf swings are based on what they think they should do, their perception of what they think they should do. Right or wrong, as humans, we learn 100% to our ability based on our knowledge of things. So if we think we have to slide the club under the ball, to hit a 5-iron, that's exactly what we're going to do. And we'll have great success in doing that move. But that move doesn't translate to great success on the golf course.
Right.
So it's just a re-education, changing the thought process.
So what parts of the golfing machine have had the biggest influence on your teaching? I know you still use a lot of that information and obviously putting the pieces together. And what would you say you use, the parts of it that you use today in your teaching?
Well, I would say that, you have so many pivot knee combinations, so many angles to swing this club on. So many, basically you have a rotating and non-rotating club faces. So that's how I classify them. If it's non-rotating, that's kind of like you're just holding it square as you stood up horizontally and you moved, your club in a horizontal motion. It's not opening or closing.
That's a horizontal hinge. Is that that's what it's called, right?
No,
that's that different.
If you held it up, if you just held it up and you move the club with your arms back and forth, your wrists are not turning and your wrists are rolling.
Gotcha.
So therefore that would be a no roll.
Right.
Okay. Everything else is rolling. It's either full roll, and there's a horizontal hinge, but then there's a dual horizontal hinge.
Okay.
Then you have the reverse roll, which is what most people use in bunker shots.
Right. So
those would be in my world, those are called rolling releases, and there's only one non-rolling release. So, and again, depends on the player, because most of them are not using any of those, because they have that lead wrist coming into full extension at impact. That in itself precludes any kind of rotational movement. So
right.
You got to fix you have to fix their perception of that piece.
So that's a great lead in, because I found, as I was doing my research on some of the other interviews that you did, I found a really cool interview you did with I won't mention the name, but you said there's errors that sort of the common errors that most players make, and you said most are off plane, most allow the club head to pass their hands coming in impact, and most have faulty pivots, and then all have uneducated hands. And I love that. Like, right. That's one of the biggest things I took from Golf Machine was, and I used that sort of terminology with my lessons, is educating the hands. And you said educated hands cure all of the things I just mentioned. So this would be a great lead in to say, how do you teach players to use their hands and arms properly?
So we start with just a basic chip shot. Right? I mean, the club's only moving 2 feet in each direction. So to beginners, I do not teach using the bounce in chip shots. I teach setting the club the way it's designed.
Right.
So that means the handle is leading. That's how it's designed. So we learn how to make a motion from thigh to thigh with that handle staying intact, striking ball first, and a very, very small divot. So, and there's no pivot. So, the ball, you're set up, with a little more pressure, weight on the front, and just stays there during that motion, because it's basically a hand and arm motion with the club. So if I was talking to a little kid, I'd say, form the letter Y, now take the Y back and keep the Y coming through the impact.
Okay, good visual.
So you don't break the Y, you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then once they can do that, we start doing pitching, and we introduce, the radial piece, the cocking of the lead wrist. So now we still don't have a pivot. We take it back to right forearm level to the ground, or trail forearm level to the ground, with zero pivot except for any needed shoulder turn. So now we have an L. We formed an L. So we come down, we're at Y at impact, and we're still at Y post impact. Again, we're going to stop right where we'd stop a chip shot.
Mm-hmm.
So they learn how to do that with zero pivot. Then once they can do that, we add the pivot piece. Now let your body follow.
Right.
Your arms back and through, and go through a longer finish. But so we do a lot of training with the butt end of the club, because that stinking club head just gets in the way. So, well, I'll put a ball on the ground or on a small tee, have them hold the shafts by the club head, take it back, strike the ball with the butt end of the club. Amazingly, they can do that really, really well. But when you switch ends, they want to take that club head and throw it under the golf ball.
Right.
So we do a lot of that kind of training.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually how I probably learned that from you. I'm sure is sort of working from the hands and backwards into the pivot, especially for newer players. Do you give any? Right. If we go deeper into that, do you give any reference of like the back of the lead hand or the palm of the right hand or anything that sort of represents the club face from a visual standpoint to create the feel of where the face is, or do you just let them swing their arms and sort of look at low point?
I will. Before we grip the club, we'll actually do a little drill to find out where their neutral location is with their lead hand, and there's all kinds of these variations, of course, in the golfing machine, and they all have pluses and minuses. You see a lot of junior golfers what's called a 10-2 grip, hands turned away from target. So super, super strong lead hand and super underneath trail hand. And that's how a lot of kids get all that lag, that and the heaviness of the club.
Sure. But
as you start building speed with that kind of grip, that's not going to work, because all you're going to do is hit snipe hooks. So we do talk about the lead hand's club face control, the trail hand, specifically the forefinger of the trail hand, is for sensing and directing the weight of the sweet spot.
Yeah. Pressure point.
Right.
Yeah. I like that. All right. So anything else about, because I know you went from golfing machine, and then I'm sure that sort of led you into working for Medicus and the 5 simple keys and coming up with those sort of fundamentals. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so Medicus approached me years ago, and because of the golfing machine stuff, and then many years after that, they wanted to do this thing, and so we started asking people, what are commonalities of all these players, in the past 100 years or so? And as you look at the commonalities, they kind of all had those same things. You know, they had a lead wrist and club shaft in line, because if you got a pretty strong grip, it wouldn't be flat; it'd have a little bit of bend.
Sure.
But the shaft would be up. You always had what was called a diagonal sweet spot path.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody swings down the target line back and through. Even if they're outside in, it's diagonal. It's just diagonal.
The wrong direction.
Going the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And all great players had steady heads. Their heads would translate a little up and down, but very few side to side. So the majority of them did that. They were able to control their club face. You don't see players that are really good or players that are playing for a living. The one thing that they do miss is when they really hit those off-the-wall shots, that's a lack of club face control. Now, whether that was a sequence issue or something else, the ultimate goal is it still didn't control that club face relative to the path.
Right.
So what I said when we were going to shoot this, I said, I don't want this to be a golfing machine thing, nor do I want it to be a stack and tilt thing. So we need to figure out a way to do this. Well, David really was real heavy into the stack and tilt. I was a golfing machine guy, and it didn't really come out the way that I wanted it to. I think it leaned more one side than the other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good friends with Andy and Mike, and Andy and Mike, I think, have done our profession a great service. They've helped educate tons of people.
Yeah, me included.
Whether there are parties out there that agree or disagree, it doesn't make any difference. Their players get better. Okay, so and they catch a lot of grief for it. They
Right.
do. But at the end of the day, the people giving out the grief are the people that really haven't studied and gone there and really gone through the process with them. I was there the entire time they shot their first DVD. And, I would place the cameras based on where they wanted, what they wanted to show in that particular piece. Because the director really didn't know what Andy and Mike, he was a director, but he didn't really know what the shot needed. So
Right.
I helped them place the cameras and do all that. And like I said, it was, I when it first came out, and I told Andy and Mike this, I was not a proponent just because of what I saw in exaggerated stages, and I was fairly vocal about that. And once I started to understand more, got to know them more, we sat down the night before the shoot and we went through the stroke pattern and the pieces that they were using, and so we kind of ironed all those out, and then like I told them, I said, I was pretty vocal about this, and I got to apologize. I was uneducated in what you were trying to do and trying to bring across, and all I saw was an image, and that's what provoked my response. So
yeah, I think that
anyway,
I was the same way as when we saw the pictures come out in Golf Digest. I didn't understand it and just sort of jumped to conclusions, and I've since kowtowed and said my apologies, and I've learned a ton from those guys. Right.
And Andy does a great job in the education.
He does.
But not everybody wants to draw the ball, and that's a primary pattern, or was. I don't know if it still is.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Some players would rather fade the ball. So, I've got players that do both.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't necessarily with the hands in as deep as they would like. But you look at, it's just like training aids. I must get 100 training aids a year sent to me that are supposed to do this miraculous thing. Well, I'll look at it I'll try it. I'll have members try it, other players, and 9 times out of 10, it doesn't do anything that the inventor thought it was going to do. But we find another use for it.
Right.
So I'll tell them maybe it's better off if you use it for this. So yeah, that's. But yeah, but going back to, if you go to Morad, TGM, Second Hill, they all had roots in the golfing machine. So apparently, everything that has roots based in the golfing machine comes under fire.
Yeah, it seems that way.
That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I thought it was interesting that another interview that I saw you did was a great question was, what would you say to Mr. Kelly if he was still alive? And you said, one, I wish he left us too early, and two, that he would have evolved right with everybody else. So you can't judge, what he had to work with at that time, which was incredible.
Right. Well, I mean, he was always evolving, or there wouldn't be 8 editions.
Right. And if he would have had the measuring devices and the technology that we have now, it would have been incredible to see what he would have come up with.
Right. Yeah, it would have been. Because, I mean, for what he had, it was pretty darn good,
Absolutely.
So, so then you go, so when I got kind of, really into the golfing machine, I went to see Ben, of course. I went to see Tomasello, Alex Sloan, George Killenhoffer, Danny Elkins, all the guys that I knew that were teaching the golfing machine. And I don't even remember where I was living, but I know I made a drive to. I flew out. Kathy Schmidt and I did to Monterey, and spent a month with Ben on his tee. We'd take a lesson, and then I would watch for all day long for a month. And then went to see Tommy. Tommy and I knew each other for a long time. Went to see Tommy. You couldn't be on two totally opposite ends of the spectrum between Ben and Tommy. Tommy taught hitting, Ben taught swinging, and neither one of them taught the other one. Wow. And Alex was right in between. Alex taught more, like, according to Sally, Homer's widow. Yeah. Alex taught more Homer skills. So, and Alex did a lot of workshops. I got invited to go over to the Australian PGA and spend 30 days. I said, I'm not going. And so Tommy went. He went over and spent 30 days. Took his wife with him. I just didn't want to go. I didn't want to be gone for 30 days.
That is a long time.
Yeah.
So are you still in charge of that organization, or is it even still, are they still doing the AIs, or are they doing the education?
I don't know what day with it. It's still up there, obviously. Medicus is still doing it. We did schools for a long time, consumer schools. Now I just do mine, and Dave does his. So, but we're on you're kind of on the same path. I mean, I haven't found a 6 key, so everything falls within that range. Right. I mean, if you look at a pivot, it falls within that range. If you look at wrist conditions, that falls within those ranges. If you look at delivery, that falls within those ranges. If you look at ball flight, that falls within the ranges. So everything still falls within those 5 keys.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, you've probably seen my mastermind skills. I pretty much copied them, aside from, low point control being my number 1, and then sort of building from there with centered pivot and sweet spot path control. So, I mean, it's just a great framework. And then diving deeper into matchups after that, I mean, there's really not a better way, especially for young coaches like the guys that work for me, to learn how to sort of put these pieces together when they're looking at golf swings.
Yeah, the biggest thing is, it doesn't matter what model or methodology you're teaching, you've got to match the pieces up. Right. Machine is, you had a way to match all that stuff up. So if you know that this arm location, swing plane in the golfing machine, and sweet spot, if you know that this arm location works better with this kind of pivot and this kind of club face motion, you just have to match those all up. Chuck Cook made a great post yesterday about somebody mentioning players that lift their arms. I don't know if you got to see that or not.
I did see that. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So higher hand players need to really work on shallowing the club, which means now it's going to swing probably more to the right.
Mm-hmm.
You should hit the ball higher, but because of the amount of rotation of the club face. Lower armed players won't hit it as far or as high because of the length of the arc, but they'll have better control of the club face, and they're easily it's easily or much more easy to get that club to move left or less, to the right for right-handed player in the downswing.
Right. More pivot driven.
So, yeah. Well, and it's easier to rotate with a little bit of a flatter or lower hand location. Now, if you got somebody that can't rotate, then they do that with an upper body and a chest motion, which is fine.
Right.
You just need to make sure that how they're slid up to the ball accommodate that. I mean, I get players that can't hardly turn their hips at all, So I just set them on the front post. We stay there. We leave the center of mass over there. We keep most of the pressure there, and from there, all they do is basically we flatten the arm plane out, so they basically rotate the chest,
mm-hmm.
so the club doesn't move outside the line, and they can compress the ball that way. So
yeah. That's good. I mean, that's what we're doing is trying to figure out how we get people that can't move, like the tour players, to hit the ball better, and that's where that's so valuable.
Right, which is basically everybody we teach.
Exactly right. Yeah, unless they're out on tour, which I'm not. I'm teaching the average golfers that are coming off of injuries or are tight and. Right. And can't move and sit behind a desk all day. So you're trying to work your way around the limitations.
Right. Well, if they could move like a tour player, they'd be on tour.
That's right. So. All right. So
that's like somebody asked me the other day. He says, I want to turn pro, but I don't think I hit it far enough. And I go, well, how far do you think you need to hit it? He goes, well, I should be hitting over 300 yards. And I said, well, if that was the case, Zach Johnson wouldn't be out there. Brian Gay wouldn't be out there.
Right.
I said, if you get your tour card, you already hit it far enough. Okay?
Exactly. So a couple of rapid fire questions here. What book or books have you recommended the most and why? I'm guessing Golfing Machine would be one, but think about, it doesn't have to be golf related, right, but anything personal development or life skills related. Well,
yeah, obviously Golfing Machine. And, I read a lot about, like stroke gain category and lowest score wins, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a tendency to read things that are more along the mental side for the players. A lot of Brett McCabe stuff.
Yeah, very good.
And then
Blindside.
And then how do you get your players? The hardest thing is getting players to buy in on the stuff. That's the hardest thing.
Right.
Because they think they don't have any mental issues. Well, I can tell you, everybody out there has mental issues. Okay. Whether they're having a poor season, whether they're going through personal issues, whether they're going through swing issues, they all have issues on something. So that means that their mental capacity is being maxed out by thinking about whatever one of those issues are. And it's easy for us to say, you have to clear your mind, think about the next shot. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. I've said that. Now you just have to go do it. Yeah, right. Okay.
It's not that easy.
I mean, no, I mean, I've played competitively, and I can tell you one time I was so focused, and that's it. The rest of the time, I was playing in this Pacific Northwest section thing, and and we're on the tee box, and the grass mower. I'm into my pre-shot, standing up to the ball, looking at my intermediate target. The guy drives right in front of the tee box. I never saw him, never heard him, and I just hit the ball.
That's focus.
Fortunately, he had just got past when I launched my ball. And the other guys in the group said, "Didn't you see him?" And no, I didn't. I didn't see him. I didn't hear him. So that was the one time in my life I had zero thought about anything except hitting my golf ball.
Oh man, yeah,
it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to do than to say.
No question. Yeah, and I stress to the young guys that I mentor and my staff, the difference between IQ versus EQ. And these kids come out of PGM schools with a lot of IQ, and they got certifications, they got some good information. If they're paying attention at all on the internet, they can get some decent information. But the EQ, I think, is so important. Being able to sell that student on a change, or being able to switch gears in the middle of a lesson and things. I mean, how important is that to you, and how do you think young coaches can develop that?
Well, so like you said, I mean, patients out there, you could say, okay, I think I want to be a teaching pro. And in 2 days, you could know all the information that's out there. Or in 2 weeks, I'm sorry. You could know all the information. You wouldn't know it all. You could study it all. In 2 years, you might know it all, that information. But that doesn't mean you can teach it. You have to have boots on the ground experience. So this is what I always ask my players. How do you learn to succeed? And they don't know it first until I tell them. I said, well, you have to learn how to fail.
Yes.
I said, each failure makes you move forward in your succession. So when you failed enough times, you finally have succeeded. Well, I could have all this book knowledge, go out there on this lesson tee, and couldn't get a person to hit a golf ball because I've never had the opportunity to do that. But I have all the knowledge. I don't have an understanding of how to apply that knowledge.
Experience, right? So it's just getting it and getting in there and being able to teach a lot.
It's experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my personal thing that I like to do when I had interns is I have them do group clinics. No one-on-one lessons. So the group clinics I can monitor, because basically those are beginning players.
Right.
So I can monitor to see how they're working with somebody that's never hit a golf ball before. As they get better and better at those, then we move into maybe the adult clinics, where these players have played golf, but they're, 15, 20, 30 handicappers. And once they've demonstrated the ability to do that, not with a beginning player, or a junior golfer, I'll let them start with a 15, 20 handicapper. All right, let's see if you can improve how this person's ball flight is and how you're going to affect their scoring. And then once they can do that, I'll turn them loose. Gotcha.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to train them.
Yeah, because I don't want them to start with juniors, especially if you're trying to develop, elite juniors. They got a long way to go.
Right.
All right, in their career. So I'm going to put you with a guy that's been out there a long time, has got these ways ingrained. Now, let's see how you can do with that.
Yeah.
You can't make him any worse, okay?
I love that. That's really good. Yeah, it's like I always tell my staff is like, you're going to learn more by teaching beginning players or a player that's, like you said, has ingrained habits over the years that hadn't gotten any better quicker than you're going to learn, by teaching better players, I think, initially.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because better players just need tweaking.
Right.
So if you're kind of a younger coach and you haven't been doing this a long time and you get a better player, what happens if you give them the wrong tweak and they get worse? That takes experience in many years before you work with really good and elite players, because usually it's just a minor deal.
Right.
It's nothing major unless they want to do a rebuild like Nick Faldo did. It's usually nothing major.
So you mentioned failure and how important that is in a young coach's career and really just giving lessons. Describe a failure or an apparent failure that has set you up for later success.
Now, you cut out just a little bit. What was that again?
I said we were talking about failure and how important that is to learning and getting better. I said, yep. Do you have a failure or an apparent failure that has set you up for later success?
Oh, I had lots of them when I was younger. I failed a lot of times.
Well, give us a couple of stories or examples.
Well, I mean, so when I first started out, I mean, nobody really showed me how to teach. I taught what I was doing in my game, and then I'd wait for the golf publication to come out, and whatever was in it that month, okay, that's what I'm teaching. Well, so I learned pretty quick that doesn't work, and I had lots of failures because these people couldn't do what was in these golf magazines, these golf publications, and they really couldn't do what I could do. So I failed a lot when I was younger. And that's when I decided to go out and watch what all these other teachers were doing. And they all did something totally different, but they all had success with their players. So that's what led me down the path, was going to watch other teachers. And then that led me down the path to the golfing machine.
So when you would, I hate to interrupt there, but and I really love this part, when you were watching other teachers, or let's just say you were giving lessons and maybe weren't happy with a lesson afterwards, did you journal? Did you write stuff down, make lists, or how did you remember everything that you liked or didn't like about either your lessons or the ones you were watching?
Well, when I went to watch other coaches and other teachers, yeah, I would write stuff down. I carried a little, it was a big cassette recorder with a big microphone in those days.
Oh, wow.
And I'd ask them just to talk about stuff, and then I'd watch it and I'd say, what was your process for determining what you're doing? And they'd give me their answer, and then when I'd leave, I'd think about that same process, and I'd have a student that I want, and I would look, I have this vast storehouse over my head, this vast storehouse of useless information that's just crammed with stuff. And so I'd access that, pull out some notes or an audio cassette, and they'd say, well, I did this because they were doing that. Well, I have a player doing this. So I try to get him to do what that coach did. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't.
Right, trial and error, right?
So that's when I said, okay, well, it worked with it worked with his player, but it didn't work with my player. That's why I said not everything's going to work with the same player with the same fault. So it took me a long time to figure that out. And I can remember interview stuff years ago, a long time ago, with Mo Norman. And I'd say, Mo, teach me how to swing like you. He said, oh, no, swing like you, not like Mo. And that took me forever. I thought, well, I said, he just brushed me off. He doesn't want to teach me anything. Well, what he meant was you have to swing like you can do, right? Not like he does. Because his original golf swing didn't look anything like the golf swing we all know. Looking golf swing.
Right.
Normal stance, normal setup, everything. I mean, you can actually go up to YouTube and find the video. I think he was 23 years old, teeing off in this tournament. And it's Mo, but it's not the Mo that everybody knows. It's actually pretty cool. So, But that's what he meant. So when I do this with a player and fail, I go, why did it fail? I just did exactly what this teacher did. Well, that's when I learned that the same fix doesn't always fix that same problem with every person.
Right.
So then that's why the golfing machine made sense to me, because I could look at their swing and instantly catalog what they were doing, know the pieces that worked, know the pieces that were giving us trouble. So all I had to do is focus on making the change to the pieces that didn't they were doing.
I love that. That's so good. Such great advice, I think, for young coaches to start looking at swings differently and start to understanding the pieces. But like I said, a lot of it's trial and error, figuring out what works for that player. When it doesn't work, don't do that again, right?
Right. For that player.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so a couple more rapid fire questions here. I appreciate your time. This has been fantastic. When you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do, or what do you tell yourself? Is there any kind of go-tos or tactics when you're, I guess, overwhelmed or stressed?
Well, I'm on meds for that, so that's the easiest way to do it. So I, when I'm not at the golf course, unless I'm working on a video editing or something, I'm kind of like Rory said when he was 17 years old, what he said in the interview. I mean, I have a life outside of golf. It's not 24/7 golf. If that was, I'd be under the most stress you could be. So unless I'm doing something golf related, like I said, either an article, video, or teaching, when I'm not doing any of those, I got other things I like. I'll read. I like figuring out how things work, electrically, mechanically, and although I'm not very good at any of it, I can troubleshoot. Like friends of mine have a website. They go, "There's something wrong here." I can troubleshoot it pretty quick. But I'm not an IT guy. It's just kind of hobbies.
Right. Take your mind away from your job.
Yeah. That's the thing with young guys. See, they want to teach 40 hours a week, 7 days a week. I did that for 40 years. I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
And what it does is you're out there ready to change the world. But believe me, the world's still going to be here. Okay, so you need to set a schedule that's figure out how much money you want to make. This is the way you do the math. How much money do you want to make? Divide that by the number of hours you want to teach each week. That's going to give you your hourly rate. Now, if that comes out to $1,000 an hour, then you're either set your standards too high or you got to work more hours. Right? I mean, Dave Pell's $30,000 for a day, right?
Right.
So, I don't know. I don't know how many takers he has.
All he needs is one.
He fill every day. I don't know. Yeah, that's all I need is one.
Yeah,
okay?
exactly.
One of those a month, right?
Right.
But when you set your rate that high, there's two things that can happen. You're either going to attract high-end clients, or you're not going to see anybody.
Right.
Right. So you have to be prepared for that. So, if you want to make $10,000 a month, but you want to work, well, round it off to 25 hours, okay, a week. Right. So that's 100 hours. Divide that into $10,000. That's how much you need to charge per hour.
Yes, I like that.
Whatever that number is. So that way, you have to have time, family. You have to have time for social life. You have to have time for the people that got you to where you are, that sent you to school or paid for your education or stood by you, as your spouse while you were out making no money, and they're working their tail off. Now it's your turn to kind of do the payback, pay it forward.
Right.
And that's what you do. I have. I've given. I don't have any kids, but I have people I'm close to. I have a couple of players, one specifically that's kind of like a son to me. And so I passed on a lot of my artwork, signed stuff by Bobby Jones, old Hogan pictures and stuff like that. I've passed that on to him. I've had it for a long time. I'm passing it on to somebody else so that when they have children, if they're golfers, they can pass it on as well. So, but, he's got a signed thing by Francis Ouimet. I mean, that's probably who my Hogan stuff is going to go to as well. But, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed having it for 40 years. Now it's time to give it to somebody else,
Yeah, that's incredible. That is.
If I could cut my hours, if I could cut my hours back any more than 20 or 25, I would. But,
right.
I don't know anybody around there that's going to pay me $7.50 an hour.
I hear you. That's great advice. All right, so one last question. If you had to give one message to the world, to billions of people, and put it on a billboard via, it could be any medium, I guess, but I like the metaphorical billboard image. What would it be and why?
Related to golf or everything?
Anything. It could be life. Is what mantra? What do you want to tell the world from Chuck Evans?
Trust in him.
I like it. Very, very, very well said, and a great way to close. Chuck, I can't tell you how enjoyable this was, and I so appreciate what you've done in my career. You probably don't even know half the things that I've taken from you, and
okay.
And I really
I just keep getting stiffed on the Guru workshop. I don't know what the deal is with that. I don't know.
Oh my gosh! Well, yeah. Well, we didn't have the full presentation there last year. We just had. I'm just doing the smaller one-on-ones. Which again, you talk about traveling and doing your traveling schools. Definitely might be interested in having you up there to Carmel to do one of those. That would be a lot of fun to teach beside one of my mentors.
It'd be fun with me too. I'd love it.
So tell the listeners how they can get a hold of you. Give them your website information and your social media handles so they can reach out and say thank you.
Yeah, so the website is chuckevansgolf.com. My phone number, email are up there. Can get me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. All Chuck Evans. So they can get me on all of them.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for your time, and I mean, you're the best, and just keep up what you're doing, and you've been such an inspiration to me and many other coaches and teachers out there. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Well, Jace, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you and shoot the breeze and learn from each other. That's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. Study, practice, teach, as I always say, and you're the epitome of that. So I appreciate it. I'll catch up with you soon, my friend.
All right, man. All right, I'll see you. Appreciate it.
What's up, everybody? Guru back here again with a couple of things before you take off. First, huge thank you to my friend Chuck Evans for coming on the show and sharing with us such great information and advice. Please don't forget to reach out to Chuck on Twitter or Instagram at Chuck Evans, or visit his website at chuckevansgolf.com and say thank you. Also, do me a favor and tweet me your biggest takeaway from Chuck in my conversation with Mr. Evans. You can reach me on Twitter or Instagram at GolfGuruTV. That is at GolfGuruTV. Also, check out my website, www.golfgurutv.net, where you can find videos, articles, and a lot more information on my teaching and coaching. And don't forget to send me questions for #Guru Friday, where I answer all your teaching and coaching questions. You can email me at golfgurushow@gmail.com. And don't be afraid to just email me with any suggestions for the show or anything, any comments, any recommendations. That would be great. I'd love to hear from you guys. I really appreciate your support. The downloads have been incredible. I just can't believe how many people are listening to the show. So really, really appreciate it. Let me know if I can help you in any way by reaching out to me on any of those social media handles or just sending me an email. And I love hearing from all the fans out there, so I really appreciate all the feedback that I'm getting. And as I always leave you with, study, practice, teach, and then pass it on. We'll talk to you next time.